The Vortex Pinnacle is being introduced to the Mythic Plus dungeon pool for Season 2 of Dragonflight. This is one of the shorter dungeons we'll be running next season with a timer of 30 minutes, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. At the start of the dungeon, you'll encounter a few different trash mobs. Vortexes will spam cast Windbolt on players dealing nature damage. Interrupt this where you can, but you will need to save a kick for their Cyclone cast. This will incapacitate a player for 6 seconds, leaving them unable to deal damage or heal. Gust soldiers will charge at a random player with Rushing Wind, knocking them back and inflicting a heavy dot for 8 seconds, so use the defensive if you're targeted, and healers keep on top of the incoming damage. They will also buff themselves with Wind Flurry, increasing their attack speed massively for their next 3 attacks, so tanks be prepared. Armored Mistrals will use Cloud Guard and deflect all incoming damage from in front of them, so to maximize DPS here you'll want to stay close to the mob so that you can easily get behind them. Do keep an eye out for their pressurized blast cast as well though, as you'll need to run out from this, otherwise it will deal massive damage and knock you way up. Here you'll encounter your first lurking Tempest of the dungeon. These mobs cannot attack your group if at least one of you is facing them to keep them hidden. Just ignore these mobs as long as you don't all have your back to them, otherwise they'll start firing lethal currents at your party. Cloud Princes will occasionally channel Turbulence, dealing AoE damage and pushing players back. They will also cast a Bomb Cyclone at a targeted zone that will deal heavy damage to anyone within it, so again, get out. The first boss in the Vortex Pinnacle, Grand Vizier Ertan. This boss will spam cast Lightning Bolt on random players. Cycle your interrupts here as best you can. As you start the encounter, Ertan summons Cyclone Shields which travel in a circle around the arena. Players touching them will suffer heavy damage, but you will also want to stay inside this ring as much as possible or you'll take big damage. Cyclone Shield fragments will also travel across the room, dealing heavy damage to players and slowing their haste and movement speed by 30% whenever coming into contact with them. Occasionally during the fight, Ertan will retract her Cyclone Shield, drawing them all into her. Again, dodge the cyclones, but now you're all going to be outside them. Here's where you'll pop defensives and healer cooldowns to get through this phase, as everybody is going to be suffering a lot of damage. As soon as the cyclones start drawing out again, run inside as quick as you can to stop the ticking damage. Throughout the fight, the boss will spawn lurking Tempests we met earlier, so between your party you'll need to keep them lurking throughout the whole fight by looking at each of them. Otherwise, they'll add unnecessary damage to the encounter. The best way to do this is by spreading your group around the boss so that you're all facing different directions. Upon defeating Ertan, take the slipstream across to the next platform where we'll encounter some new trash mobs. Turbulent Squalls will cast Cloudburst, dealing heavy frost damage to nearby enemies, so interrupt this. They also shield themselves with Storm Shield, dealing pulsing damage to players, so try and purge these if possible, or burst them down to stop the AoE damage. Empyrean Assassins will assassinate players, porting behind them and striking all players within 5 yards for physical damage, so stay spread. They will also periodically cast Vapor Form, reducing their damage taken massively, so interrupt this at all costs. If it does go through though, some classes can purge this buff. Young Storm Dragons will spawn a healing circle as soon as you engage with them. Tank the dragon outside of this circle, but your group can stay in so they receive huge passive healing. The dragon will fire an Icy Buffet, dealing huge damage via a 12-second debuff to anybody stood within 60 yards, so prepare defensives here. The dragon will also face and target a random player with a wide frontal cone called Chilling Breath. Avoid standing in this at all costs, and it will be easier to dodge if you're stood closer to the mob. Onto the second boss, Altairus. Avoid standing in the cold front puddles at the edge of the encounter. It will reduce your healing and damage by 50% and deal ticking damage to you. Speaking of ticking damage, your party will suffer constant biting cold damage every 3 seconds as well during the fight. Throughout this fight, the boss will change direction of the wind. At all times during the fight, you should face your back to this wind to gain the upwind buff. A 30% haste increase, which will make this fight a lot quicker. Alternatively, if you are facing downwind, your haste will be reduced by the same amount and you'll suffer ticking damage every 0.5 seconds, so try to turn your back to the wind ASAP. For the large part, you'll also want to avoid the many tornado swirlies around the encounter. They'll knock you up, deal damage and slow you, however they are also used to jump over the expanding ring from Altairus' downburst ability that will deal massive damage and silence you for 5 seconds if you are struck. As the ring approaches you, walk into a nearby tornado and you'll avoid being struck by downburst. Finally, much like the young dragons we fought earlier, the boss will cast a frontal Chilling Breath that you'll need to dodge, avoid it or die. Upon defeating Altairus, we'll take the slipstream over to the final platform. Here we'll find quite a few new mobs. Servants of Asaad will charge random range players and deal extra tank damage through Sure Strike. Ministers of Air will cast Lightning Lash, channeling lightning at a player for 5 seconds. You will die to this if you don't position yourself under a grounding field that you find around these mobs. Don't stay in these fields too long though, as their other cast is Overload Grounding Field. inflicting massive damage to players stood under a grounding field. Temple Adepts will be your priority kick mob. They spam Holy Smite, but your highest priority interrupt here is on Greater Heal. It will heal a nearby mob for 30% and spam it at lower health. They also increase their casting speed through a desperate speed buff for 12 seconds to make kicking that much harder. Executor of the Caliph will stomp the ground with Crashing Stone, dealing unavoidable physical damage to all players, so be prepared. More notably, they cast Rally, increasing all their allies' health by 50% for 20 seconds, and this buff can stack. Try to avoid pulling too many of these at once. Finally, you'll encounter a pack of non-elite mobs named Skyfall Stars. Don't be fooled by these mobs, they deal insane party-wide damage through Starlight, so burst them down quickly and use personal defensives here. The final boss in the Vortex Pinnacle, Asaad, Caliph of Zephyrs. He'll cast Chain Lightning on random players throughout the encounter, dealing nature damage and jumping to players within 8 yards, so stay spread. This boss will occasionally spawn Skyfall Novas that are high priority mobs to take down, so you should hard swap to nuke these mobs down, as you will all suffer arcane damage until it is destroyed. Asaad will also cast Static Cling, damaging players from nature damage and reducing their movement speed by 90% for 18 seconds if you are touching the ground at the end of this cast. Make sure to jump just as this cast is finishing. This is imperative as this slow will likely get you killed when Asaad casts Unstable Grounding Field, spawning a triangle of lightning randomly in the room that your whole group will need to stand within, otherwise you will be one-shot by his Supremacy of the Storm channel directly after. Rinse and repeat. But that's all you need to know for this encounter, and that wraps up the Vortex Pinnacle in Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you out, then please drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.